Our speaker today is a lifelong Memphian and a graduate of both Memphis University School and Memphis State University. In his extensive experience, he has managed some of this community's most important assets, including museums, the Park Commission, and those band of ducks in the lobby of the Peabody Hotel. Will you please help give a warm welcome to our Shelby County historian, Mr. Jimmy Ogle.
Thank you, Luke, and thanks for the big turnaround today. You had a big event here this weekend, and we appreciate the facilities being ready. I know you had to do a lot of work, so thank y'all very much for that. This, well, there's our sponsors again. I got to mention the sponsors, Zona. Vincent Astor, Phyllis Peterson, Erickson Group, University of Memphis Libraries, and Communities and Conversation Series at Rhodes College. This talk is going to be my version of the Civil War. There's a lot of versions of the Civil War in there. But this is kind of the way I'm going to approach it today. It's kind of what I did, Tracy, last year at the festival there, and I liked that version of it, the things we put together. Before the Civil War, from 1795 on, a naval battle of Memphis, the moving appeal, which is pretty big for me, because that was me right there portraying John Reed McClanahan at Elmwood Cemetery. And then during Union occupation, and then after the Civil War up to 1900, so kind of a before, during, and after. Almost a Cliff Notes version. I'm not going to tell you where every gunboat went during the battle and who rammed into who and all that stuff, you know, but I'll try to do my best with what we got. As y'all well know, Memphis is number 6 in the nation with listings on the National Register of Historic Places behind Washington, Philadelphia, Boston, Baltimore, and New Orleans, and we have over 11,000 properties listed. So we're a good old historic town. The big deal about Memphis is, for centuries, we're right here in the center of the country. This is the central coast of our country, the Mississippi River. Sometimes it used to be as much as 60 miles wide before we had flood control, but it does drain 41% of continental North America, 31 states and 2 provinces of Canada, 1.25 million square miles and 250 tributaries. That's how people got here in the 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th century. Not always by land, but this was the expressway at the time, I guess you could say. We're on the 4th Chickasaw Bluff. It was formed about 400 AD. These series of bluffs we have here, the first being 60 miles north at Fulton, where Fort Pillow is Fort Pillow State Park there now. 40 miles north is Randolph, where Fort Wright was, a training fort, let's say, for the Confederacy in the early years. Randolph's still up there. The only Civil War magazine, Confederate-built Civil War magazine in Tennessee is up at Randolph right now. And we can get you into there on a field trip sometime if you want to. Then the 3rd Chickasaw Bluff is 20 miles north at Meeman Shelby Forest State Park. The 7 flags you used to see flying down on Mud Island, because they don't fly them anymore for whatever non-historical reason, are the 7 flags of jurisdiction over the last 468 years. Spain, France, Great Britain, United States, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Confederate states. So we'll get into that in just a minute. The Spanish influence, 1795 and 1796, there was a fort here, Fort San Fernando. They signed a treaty that relinquished all their rights east of the Mississippi, north of New Orleans. So they're out of here by 1795, 1796. They went across the Hope Field, which is near Marion. That was the way you got to Marion, to Little Rock in the 1830s and 40s, the old military road. So they're gone. And then the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, you see what about doubles the size of our country, puts Memphis right smack dab in the middle, very strategic with the river here. And here. So the French now are all in this area. Then we buy that in 1803. So by 1803, we have both the Spanish and the French out of here. And then we have a big earthquake, 1811, 1812, that unsettled some of that land over there in Arkansas. We call it the sunken land over there. Reelfoot Lake was formed during that time. And then the War of 1812, which was a very benign war, is our second war of independence from Great Britain. So once that got over with in the Battle of 1815, down here, where Andrew Jackson goes into New Orleans and wins, even though the treaty had already been signed. They just didn't have communications at the time in December to January on that. But again, a very benign war, and at Lake Erie, Chesapeake Bay, the White House got burned, Star Spangled Banner was written. That's a whole nother story. And then the Battle of New Orleans. So by 1815, now the British are out of here. This is the most important war for Memphis, because that's the way we were able to be established here. 1796, we become a state We're the third state to join the Union after the original 13 colonies. In the first 22 years, we're a state. All of West Tennessee is not even owned by Tennessee. It's owned by the Chickasaw Nation. So we got East Tennessee, West Tennessee, Chickasaw. And we purchased this right here. That's 6.8 million acres of land we purchased for $330,000 or 4.5 cents an acre on 20 annual payments of $15,000 each. Pretty good deal negotiated by Isaac Shelby and Andrew Jackson. That's 21 counties now you see in this area here. Everything basically west of the Tennessee River. And then the westward expansion. We'll get going here in the Civil War. St. Louis, Natchez, and Memphis, if you saw that map with the jumping off points, they're practically during the 19th century. Apparently there were more millionaires per capita in Natchez than there were anywhere else in America per capita. So we're growing. We got 22 states in there. We got 11 free, 11 slave. As we're going up, Missouri wants to come in. So at that time, you have the Missouri Compromise where Maine breaks off from Massachusetts. So now you got 12 and 12. Then you have the Arkansas wants to come in. Missouri is the first state west of the Mississippi to come in. Arkansas is the second, which makes Memphis even more strategic. The Kansas-Nebraska Act for local state choice, which was later repealed. Then the Dred Scott decision in 1857 by the Supreme Court, and led to the Fifth Amendment. So here's the military road. When you come in from Memphis, there's Hopeville, Marion, all the way through the swamp, Crowley's Ridge, all the way to Little Rock. 1834, the Overland Mail Memphis became the eastern terminus of the Overland Mail, with that big river blocking everybody getting across all the time. So they'd ferry across the river to Arkansas, travel to Fort Smith, a huge museum in Fort Smith now about Marshals, right? U.S. Marshals, if you want to get over to western Arkansas. And that connected to the main line to the west there. And here's the routes you see right here. So this was before there was trains, there was stagecoaches, before that animal trails, all the way to the west coast. Even the Trail of Tears passed through here in 1832. This is the water route of the Trail of Tears. You know about the land route that Stage Road is, coming from the southern part of Tennessee all the way across through Bartlett, what we call Bartlett now, down to about where the pyramid is and crossing to Hopeville. But the water route came from Chattanooga, Tennessee River, up to Paducah, back down the Mississippi River by Memphis, to Arkansas River, past Little Rock to Fort Coffee, Oklahoma. About 3,000 Native Americans were moved in the 1830s on the water route of the Trail of Tears. We did this historical marker about 3 years ago down on the riverfront. That's right by Beale Street Landing. Memphis had a Navy Yard in the 1840s and 50s, built one boat. But they thought it'd be better to build boats out here where the supplies are out here and you need Western defense at the time. We still didn't know what was on the western side of the Mississippi River much at that time. Front Street was literally the front street to the river. No Riverside Drive, no railroad at that time. Here we go. No Tom Lee Park, no Mud Island out here, just the high bluffs. And then we started having boats come into this area here that we decided to lay some cobblestones out. Here's in 1854, the Memphis Navy Yard. That's about where the pyramid is, or the convention center area. So here's Memphis. And here would be Hopeville, the train line in Hopeville right there. And the river came in from the west. When you get over to Marion, when the river was up high, steamboats could make it to Marion, couldn't they? They have an old steamboat landing in Marion. You drive over there now, it seems like it's about 10 miles from the river as the river changed back and forth. And so when we built the I-40 bridge, we had to bring the channel this way to let the downriver barge tows come through straight shot rather than try to turn through the bridge. And so we took this part of the river here, dredged it up, put it on top of Mud Island to get it above the 100-year floodplain. Then we started laying cobblestones. Before we had a hard cobblestone wharf, we had a muddy slope there, very slippery, very deep in ooze. You get off a boat and go about knee deep into the mud, and you just pull your leg out, it'd suck your shoe or boot off, Wasn't a friendly way to come to Memphis. So we started laying these cobblestones, and over a 40-year period of time, 19 different work sessions, we laid over 1 million cobblestones. And that's the largest original cobblestone wharf left in America. It's on the National Register of Historic Places by itself, by the way, now. And it's going to get some repairs here soon. But that's what made us a big steamboat town. You had that hard wharf right there. You're not sinking cotton and sinking mules and sinking wagons in the mud. That river would come up and down 40 feet during the course of the year. There's another good picture of the cobblestones. When you look at it from an aerial view, it's like a quilt pattern because all the different work sessions are in there. You can see how they're in here at different angles and everything. It's really neat to get an old photograph like this and go down on the cobblestones and try to find that cobblestone. Now, we've done it before. It's not that hard. and you set it in a frame right by that cobblestone. You take the picture. You know, isn't that a cool project, Willie? Don't you wish you thought of that? Yeah. Ow, give me out of it. The cobblestone rings, the dead man rings, because the concrete's buried 6 feet down in the ground. These are the mooring rings. They have very few of those left. Then the Memphis and Charleston Railway comes in, and I know how every single person in this room just loves the Memphis and Charleston Railroad, right? Right? Okay, you don't. Well, it's the first railroad to connect the Atlantic Ocean with the Mississippi River in the history of our country. From Charleston all the way to Memphis here, that's about 800 miles. At that time, most railroads are about 100 miles long. So in transportation terms, comparatively, this was like going to the moon at the time, okay? You're riding a horse and buggy 10 miles an hour. Now you're riding a train about 50 miles an hour with all this capacity, get up and walk around and all this stuff. That was a real game changer. So now, right before the Civil War, you have this major cobblestone wharf with all the steamboats coming in. You got the train coming in. That makes us a huge transportation center, the hardwood capital of the world, 400 sawmills in the area. It was such a big deal, they bought water from the Atlantic Ocean and sprayed it into the Mississippi River, took water from the Mississippi River and sprayed it to the Atlantic Ocean, had an event called Wedding of the Waters, the greatest demonstration of popular joy ever witnessed in the Mississippi Valley. That sounds like the guy on the Peabody history talks about the Continental Ballroom, said to be, with some exaggeration, the size of Lake Michigan. That's Rod Starnes doing that, by the way. It's funny. All right, so hardwood capital, over 400 sawmills in this low bottomland hardwood forest. We clear all them out. Trees don't grow back in a season or two, do they? So we start planting cotton. Look at all this lumber. Just think of that water comes up and steals all your wood right there if you don't know what the river's going to do. That could make you mad, couldn't it? Then from after the Civil War, actually from 1803 to 1937, cotton was the USA's #1 export. And getting that train to get that cotton from Memphis all the way across to Charleston, really expedited getting the cotton to England. 40% of the cotton after the Civil War that was being milled in England came to, and went to Liverpool and Manchester, came from the Memphis area. But going down the river, down to New Orleans, around Florida, back up that way, took a long time. That really cut that off. And cotton between 1880 and 1920 was, 70% of the cotton was within 200 miles of Memphis. We were trading mules, about 75,000 a year before we had tractors. We were a big mule capital, big slave capital too, up until the 1860s. And then right now between Memphis and Little Rock, over 45% of the rice in America grows. So we're a big rice country in there. Where the high bluffs, where cotton, we're protected. This side over here in Arkansas would flood. That's that whole high, dry ground. Here's the Memphis Wharf. Here you can see all the business being conducted there. A couple more renderings there, the flatboats, the steamboats, the rafts coming in. If these folks like Memphis, they'd pull their rafts up on the banks and make a cabin out of it and just live here. Homestead. Just some neat old drawings here. Fort Pickering Boatyard down on the south end of town actually made two vessels, the CSS Tennessee and the CSS Arkansas. And this one was already almost finished, so they moved it down the Yazoo River. This CSS is Confederate States. And then it got destroyed to prevent capture in 1862, whereas the Tennessee was burned at the stock. So our two boatyards managed one boat that didn't function too well either. There's Fort Pickering, a map. So you're way down here about where the bridges coming all the way south along the riverfront, almost to Vance Avenue. And there's the development of Fort Pickering there. And you can see all the vantage points you had up and down the river, up and down the land, all the way along there. There's a New York newspaper rendering of the riverfront. The political map of the United States, the Union, the South, the neutrals, etc. Keystone of the Southern Arch. This is a quote from, I think it's President Lincoln. Yeah. Tennessee held enormous strategic importance because of its agriculture, industrial, and economic resources. The state, in Lincoln's words, was a keystone to the Southern Arch. And controlling it became a paramount aim of the Union strategy. Geographically and economically, the state was destined to be the center of the conflict. Tennessee was a crucial border between North and South, and the three major rivers, Mississippi, Tennessee, and Cumberland, flowed across the state. Through Tennessee ran the South's main east-west rail lines, as well as the Western Confederacy's principal north-south line through Jackson, Mobile, all the way down to Mobile, let's say. We actually became the Civil War capital for a while for Tennessee for about a month in 1862 after they evacuated Nashville. And then the Naval Battle of Memphis occurred June 6, 1862. And again, the Union strategy number one was get control of the western rivers. So you can see how important Tennessee was right here with these rivers right in here, with the railroad coming in here. There's Memphis on the high bluff. It was called the Anaconda Plan. I'll get to that in a minute, I guess. But if you control the western rivers, you control the ports, the troop movement, the supply movement, everything. The Union strategy number two is once you get control of the port, you get control of the newspapers and control the thought. What was getting out, whether it's propaganda or the good news or the bad news, you controlled the thought. There were 6 newspapers in Memphis at the time. And we'll come back to the Great Appeal in just a minute. So as the Anaconda Plan, it was General Winfield Scott would come around and just come around the Florida here, had the fleet come up north up the Mississippi River and snake around and choke the South off. You see, the Anaconda Plan. So 1862, up in there in the Tennessee River, Fort Henry and Fort Donelson in February, coming down the Tennessee River, Shiloh in April. April, island number 10 up there right below New Madrid, about 120 miles by land, 188 miles by river. May, Plum Point Bend. May, New Orleans Falls and Natchez. This is May of 62. June, you got Fort Pillow and Randolph, so the Southern Fleet and the Northern Fleet are coming this way. The Northern Fleet of the Union comes down and is heading for Memphis on June 6, 1862. And then within a year, Vicksburg fell, and that was the beginning of the end, really. When Vicksburg fell, that really made the Anaconda Plan complete. So the Union fleet had these boats in it right here, these vessels, let's say, even had ironclad boats. Here's some of the names right here. The flag officer was Charles Davis. You had Colonel Charles Ellett. You probably heard of the Ellett Ram, the ram boats. There's the ram fleet right there. That was kind of a new thing that the North had over the South. There's Pook's Turtles. Samuel M. Pook was a designer. Look like turtles out there, don't they, out in the water? The Confederate fleet, here are the names of the various vessels of the Confederate fleet. I'll let you look over them for a minute. The CSS, Little Rebel. The River Defense Fleet, flag officer was Captain Montgomery. The Brigadier General was Jeff Thompson. So here we go. Here comes the, Randolph had fallen. Here comes the Union fleet down the river. Here comes the Confederate fleet up the river. Here are the citizens over here watching the Naval Battle of Memphis as if it was an NFL football game or a fireworks show. They're sitting on the bank watching what's happening out in the river because they're just shooting at each other in the river. There's no land advances. There were really no shots on Memphis at all. Not a single building burned because of the railroad, right? The railroad and the port right here. That's what saved Memphis from being destroyed in the war like Atlanta and Montgomery and Birmingham because the Union got it real quick. On one battle, again, about 7,000 citizens or 5,000 citizens sat out and watched it from the banks. It only lasted 90 minutes, but it was the largest inland naval battle in the history of the world, they say. The Union fleet had about 18 gunboats and about 80 guns. The Confederate fleet had about 8 gunboats and about 18 guns. So you see it was a great mismatch, about 3-1 there. And the Union fleet was coming down the river with the current. The Confederate fleet's going up the river. The Union fleet had ironclad boats. The Confederate fleet had cottonclad boats. Sounds like a George Carlin routine, doesn't it? About baseball or something. So it's just a real big mismatch. People watched it, I guess during the Civil War, they'd tell, we're going to start the war at 11 o'clock tomorrow. Y'all be ready. And they did that a lot of the battles. They all lined up and everything, just walked right into each other and start shooting, It's just crazy. And that's what happened here. So we're quickly a northern occupied town. Again, I'm not going to run you all through the who hit who when and who rammed who when. There's a Union ironclad gunboat replica over at the Mud Island, Mississippi River Museum that you can walk onto that's very nice, and a replica of a battle from the bluff there. 5 galleries at the Mississippi River Museum that are really conclusive about the Civil War, or inclusive, let's say. There's the General Bragg being rammed. So here's the 1862 map. We've got some discussion off that lately, haven't we? Between this railroad track here and this rice plant road here and all this stuff. I don't know. We're going to figure that out. Whoever's drawing that map for the Union was a little bit offbeat, I think, Again, Fort Pickering was established here. Memphis became a sanctuary city. We didn't have that term at the time, but you think about the runaway slaves, the freed slaves, the U.S. colored troops being formed in here. We basically doubled our population during the war when most southern cities lost population. So think about that, too. The flag that flew over the post office, this post office is not on Front Street. This is over there basically at Jefferson and 2nd. The historical marker's over it on Adams, but right next to that same property. But this flag was flown. I think one shot was fired at somebody at that flag. It was like, okay, that's it. There's the old sesquicentennial marker at Adams and 3rd Street in the grove of trees there. And look at this. Doesn't it look a lot better? That's all I'm going to say. So the results of the battle was length 90 minutes, casualties Confederacy 180, Union won. And curiously, it was the guy who designed the Union ironclad gunboat, the Ellett Ram, you know. He's the one that was killed. He got shot in the leg and died like 2 weeks later. You know, how odd that is. The Confederate defense fleet was lost. The General Van Dorn escaped downriver. The CSS Arkansas was relocated, I think, to Vicksburg, and later got burned up. And Memphis Mayor John Park, there he is right there. That's Ed Williams, folks. We portrayed this back in 2012 when we did this Naval Battle of Memphis. Did not have the authority to surrender, did not have means to resist, admitted Memphis was in the Union's hands. That's about as benign as you can get in turning your city over to somebody, you know. And that's what happened. How ironic it was that Northerners were selling guns and butter to Southerners who killed Northerners, and Southerners were shipping food and cotton to Northerners who killed Southerners. It's like spy versus spy versus spy in the old Mad magazine. Everybody knew everybody. Memphis was more important to the Confederacy during Union occupation than it was before that time, it seemed like, with all the contraband and everything. Business was so good, First National Bank opened in Memphis in 1864. It's the 14th oldest bank charter in the country. It's First Tennessee Bank, as you know it. My checking account is with First Tennessee Bank. Hospital town, 5,000 beds. You look at all the Union soldiers that were housed here. Here's some of the names of the hospitals that were around. Basically from, say, where the courthouse is now, down Main Street, down 2nd Street to about Beale Street area. I can't individually spot all of them to you right now. But we took over warehouses, hotels. This is the start of Memphis's great hospital tradition. Was this disaster of the Civil War, not the battle, just the wounded soldiers coming from whether it's Missouri or Western Tennessee or Northern Mississippi. The burning of Hopefield, we got tired. Oh, which I forget which general it was, might have been Sherman, got tired. No, burning by Holbert. Got tired of them rebels over in Hopefield shooting guns over at Memphis, just having bullets drop in here. So they went over and gave them a warning. This is one of the reasons why we found out there was such a lack of response from Arkansas, because a lot of these boats got sent off or got burned during that time. So there was not a whole lot of boats on that side of the river in 1865. You see where the railroad terminal is, very important railroad terminal until we got to bridges in 1892 and 1916. Then it got wiped out by the flood. The more we built levees, the more we brought the water in and raised it higher, and it wiped out some of those low-lying areas like Hopefield, all up and down the river. We're a port of river and rails after that. This courthouse was built in 1885, the library 1893. Here's Memphis, again on the high bluff in the 1860s. There's Front Street again. There's the high bluffs and Cotton again. Now let's get to the newspaper. John Reed McClanahan. This is a book by B.G. Ellis called The Moving Appeal. And the Memphis Daily Appeal, he just did not want to, if you did not consent to letting the Union control your thought or your press, they'd throw your type or your press into the river. So he says, I'm moving on. And it got a great reputation. It was the greatest rebel of them all, the Bible of the Confederacy, old reliable, the voice of the Confederacy, that damn rebel rag, and the hornet's nest of the rebellion. That's your commercial appeal today. They don't act like it today, do they? Or fess up to it at all, and everybody else are shutting down, but that's another story. And look at all the newspapers from 1840s to 1910s. There was no radio, no TV. You know, they had handbills they could print more than just newspapers. They were printing handbills and doing other printing. So if you're printing press, if you're not going to print that federal news, you couldn't print your other work either. You're out of business. You got to either comply or go out of business. So many of the newspapers in the South, as cities got occupied, started printing the federal news. The Appeal later on merged with the Commercial, and of course you had the Press Scimitar, closed in 1983. June 1, the Postal Service ceased in 1861. Neither the CSA or USA had service. Tennessee was still in the Union. Again, Memphis was 80% Union in 61 until Lincoln called for troops. And then the men voted for separation. M.C. Galloway continued as postmaster. There was no CSA stamps until October that year. Then after that, they didn't become worth anything. And then the federal postage stamps returned on June 6, 1862. Here are our 6 daily newspapers at that time, just like you have radio and TV stations today. Announcement to be portable. He made this announcement that the appeal will continue to be punctually issued in Memphis so long as the city is in possession of the Confederate authorities. Should it, however, be occupied by the enemy, taking a lesson from the despotic suppression of Nashville journals by Andrew Johnson, we shall discontinue its publication here and remove to some safe point in Mississippi where we can express our true policy, still breathe the pure and untainted atmosphere of Southern freedom. Your appeal newspaper. And that was John Reed McClanahan. So on May 31st, 1862, there was a defense meeting called by John Park and with Colonel Thomas Rosser and leading citizens, and they were enthusiastic. I think if you saw the movie Blazing Saddles, when they called up the posse to go get, to take control of whatever the governor was doing, everybody just kind of harumphed, you know. Just very unenthusiastic about getting involved. Again, 82 dead of the Confederacies. Excuse me, 75 missing. So McClanahan's last day after the battle, his last issues in Memphis were June 1 through June 6th, Fort Pillow updates, Randolph demise, jail demolition, reminder that there was a moon eclipse on June 11th. I guess we didn't have the term lunar at the time, right? We had a moon eclipse. Political divisions in the North, the need to burn the cotton, and McClanahan watched the naval battle, although he had already moved his press on down. We notice that several of our exchanges are impressed with the idea that the appeal has already commenced to be issued at Grenada, which, of course, is a mistake. We shall continue to publish here until the city is in complete and undisputed possession of the enemy, and will issue a paper up to the morning and evening of the last day. And that was his strategy. He always stayed and held his post. And this is what really made Sherman mad, because his generals would get to a city and they would find ink-wet copies of the field newspaper. They just couldn't stop him at all as they chased him around the South. Our preparations are such that we can continue our daily issue at Grenada, the day after our removal from Memphis, and will do so, shall we ever be in the varying fortunes of war, be forced to that necessity. Our loyalty has not been of such negative character that we can hope for freedom from the federal molestation. The May 22nd, 1862 issue. Again, that's before the naval battle of Memphis. Northern newspapers did not have to periodically dismantle or move presses and boilers along wagons and boats and trains and all that stuff. They didn't have to miss meals or live in vermin-ridden housing. They didn't have to worry about replacing clothing. They weren't pursued by enemy out of the town. They're safe up there in the north. They didn't have to dodge mini balls. They didn't have to scratch. They didn't have to scratch to accept barter trade, or scratch for supplies, paper and ink. It was or run naval blockades. It was just, the northern newspapers had it easy compared to what the South did. They had roads open, bridges intact, ships moved to and from Europe, papers easily received news, telegraph service uninterrupted, deliveries were regular, subscriptions could be long-term, and were without conflict or siege. There's no battles up there in Pennsylvania, New York, and all that. Here's the post office again here. June 6, 1862, there's that beautiful sign again. The Hunt Phelan home was where Grant housed or stayed on the grounds. They had meetings in the Hunt Phelan home during the occupation here. Fort Pickering again. Center Lane and Madison. Now, there's historical markers up there at Center Lane. It's right by the Madison or the Hugh Hotel now on the wall there. What used to be the Union Planters National Bank building. This is where the presses left, got on a train, and they come down to Grenada, to Jackson, to Marion, over to Atlanta, Montgomery, finally get caught in Columbus. That's 3 years, 3 states, 1,000 miles of travel, printing a press on a reliable basis. We'll go through that real quick. There's the whole press. They had to dismantle this press. It took like 8 train cars to get it going, or get it loaded, and all the other supplies they had. They had a small day press for the little printing jobs they did. That was very important to staying open. Here's another address on Union Avenue as well. Benjamin Franklin Dill and his wife, America Carolina Dill, were the kind of the co-partners with John Reed McClanahan. Those are some great names, aren't they? Quick facts, published daily, tri-weekly, and weekly, circulation, 14,000 copies. Hey, you know anybody knows what the daily circulation, the commercial appeal is today? 37,000. More people read it than ever, though. I'm not knocking the commercial appeal because of the digital stuff now, but printed is 37,000. 14,000 here, and they're on the road running around. Pass along readership, 70,000. Subscription rate, $10, $5 to Confederate divisions. Get your Confederate discount. Foundry type, ink, paper, and press parts were very hard to obtain, and the whole press was worth about $10,000. You have the Confederate Press Association, the loss of the Associated Press. Let's see. All telegraphic stories were written clearly and concisely, free of opinion and comment, transmit news immediately, not reveal Confederacy military secrets, a complete revolution in Southern journalism, and they had a whole lot of correspondence with code names or, other names so they could send these along. These are some of the code names there. B, that's a real creative code name, and W. All right, so here we go again on the route. I'm going down. We're going to kind of fight leg by leg for 100 miles in the spring of '82, all the way down to Grenada. All the fighting's up in here, fighting along the railroad track. Here's the rail to Grenada. Grenada office overlooking Grenada Square. That car wasn't there at the time, by the way. First issue on the road was June 9th, 1862. McClanahan's eyewitness account of the battle. He gave it 3 days later. Memphis has fallen, but is a source of pride to us in this, our first issue from another theater of operations, to record the fact that she fell honorably and with her flag nailed to the masthead. The city is conquered, but her people are not crushed or converted to Lincolnism. Neither have they lost a particle of hope in the ultimate success of the South. Grenada is a pretty little town. And when he went into another city, of course, they were thinking competition. So I like to compare it. He's kind of the USA Today to the local newspapers, okay? Kind of a general overall story, not competing with the local advertisers, really, or local stories. Here's some of the things about in Grenada: introduce paper to a new audience, emphasize mission to the cause, and not to compete with the Grenada Sentinel, not to steal local readers, advertisers, or printing clients. There was a housing shortage. There were many refugees, obviously. Regional issues, end of train service to Memphis, soldiers injured jumping train. In fact, newsboys cried. A newsboy lost his hat and his papers, and he got his arm cut off by a train one time reaching for his papers, America-Carolina deal, one of the great females in the editorial rooms in the 1860s. That was unheard of at the time. They weren't even allowed to vote till 1920, women weren't. But working conditions forced proximity, compatible intellectually, open to her editing and editorial contributions. So McClanahan and both Benjamin Franklin Dill were open to her working there. She had a dominating and spirited, bright woman, and she was a chief service in the counting room. Later on, there were some discrepancies there, though. 1862, 6th and 7th, they had the Battle of Shiloh. April 25th, captured New Orleans. Then September of 1862, Sherman orders Randolph burned because they were getting nemesis up there. Then October 62, the Second Battle of Corinth. So that's some of the things being covered from Grenada. The last days in Grenada were November 62. They had maintained their quality, talked about Corinth. Pemberton evacuated Holly Springs camp, and Grenada would be next. So he got ready to go. Made no editorial farewell to Grenada. Are we ready? Was his editorial to Mississippi. So he moved down to Jackson, 114 more miles. November of 62. There's his first headquarters there at the Bowman House. And the printers bunked in the plant. The Dills at Bowman House, McClanahan in the boarding house as well. Editorial hello to Jackson. Thanked the city for hospitality. Explained exile and mission. Other newspapers' reaction. This is really cool. The best newspaper in the Confederate States reappears from Jackson, and it does us good to see its sparkling face again. That's the Houston Telegraph, you see. New Orleans Times-Picayune began to lift its coverage of Grant's movements in northern Virginia. Confederate Major John Forsyth reprinted so many items, 19 in one issue, that a column was called From the Appeal. And many of the Union generals wanted to get the appeal because they got the other side of the story. Some of them felt they weren't being fed the truth by their leaders, trying to keep their morale up and optimism up about the difficult conditions of fighting a war. Gosh, if you want to get a quartermaster's book and see what they had to do during a war. 1862 and 1863, here real quick, the Battle of Fredericksburg, Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. Grant placed in command of the Army of the West with orders to capture Vicksburg. Then May 10th, 1863, General Stonewall Jackson dies. His last words, "Let us cross over the river and rest under the shade of the trees." Year in review, and emphasize positive signs for 1863. As predicted, the major allies were mud, malaria, Mississippi swamps, and summer humidity in Mississippi. The blockade had not yet sealed off the South from Europe. Lee was always on the move. Again, a source of new paper supply came from Augusta. Began a morning edition, again, right here in Jackson, and then Jackson Falls on May 14th, 1863. He had created a satellite printing office in Montgomery, planning for the move, you see. Moving on to Montgomery, 94 miles in May of 1863. Then, moving on to Atlanta, I should have said. No, moving to Meridian, to Meridian. And then on over the Pearl River to Atlanta, 290 miles across Alabama. Reaching the public in the South, entered a major southern rail town, a big rail town again, the Intelligencer and Southern Confederacy were the big newspapers there. Thousands of readers from Tennessee, Arkansas, and Mississippi. They'd grown a readership, had national advertisers by now, would court the outsider, the refugee. First edition, June 6th, a year later, a year later in Atlanta. And then you had Sherman's Summer Log Siege in 1865. First edition in Atlanta was printed June 6th. The last edition, more than a year later, August 29th. There's the location there. No Lot is Desperate was an editorial towards the end of that time. I know that's hard to read, so I'm not going to read it. 1863 and 64, and the whole Battle of Gettysburg, Vicksburg Falls, July 4th, 1863. Battle of Colleyville, Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, Battle of Fort Pillow, and Atlanta Falls. Here's Forrest raid on Memphis in 1864. He wanted to free these prisoners from the Irving Block prison. That's right across 2nd Street from Court Square. Wanted to capture the 3 generals and capture horses. There were more horses and mules in service in the Civil War than men. Think about that, how valuable horses and mules were. So he raided the Gayosa Hotel. I think his brother ran in there with a horse. General Washburn's escape. He was down there by AutoZone Park. He jumps out of the window in his nightshirt, runs up the alley by the rendezvous in today's directions, up to the riverfront to get to Fort Pickering. That's why you have General Washburn's escape alley. Washburn had replaced Hulbert because Hulbert couldn't keep Forrest out of West Tennessee, but the joke was ultimately on Washburn because Washburn couldn't keep him out of his own bedroom. You see, Washburn later became the governor of Wisconsin, and he named General Mills. He was a general. He was proud of it. When you eat your Cheerios tomorrow, think about this image right here. Him running past the rendezvous to go make up Cheerios, right? Go figure. The last to leave Atlanta. All 5 newspapers had fled weeks earlier. The voice of the besieged city, he stayed on his post, and he goes down to Macon, I believe, to Montgomery, 162 miles. Zigzagging around. Beginning of the end of the war, Lincoln got reelected. General Sherman begins his march to the sea. The fall of Richmond, surrender at Appomattox. Lincoln's assassinated. Sultana disaster. Let's go do this real quick. Montgomery took nearly 2 months to reach. First edition was September 20th, 1864. The last being March 31st. The war is almost over. The appeal has gone. So they moved on down towards Columbus. The last wartime issue was March 31st, 1865. Then they got caught in Columbus 87 miles later, near Macon, I guess. And the type was thrown into the river, but the press was saved. And then on April 11th, the war is just about over. They reassembled. The Yankees are coming. April 20th, Macon fell. And then the Macon Telegraph restarted on May 10th. So what they did is they got the supplies, took a wagon to Chattanooga, caught a riverboat from Chattanooga up to Paducah, back down to Memphis in May of 65. Dill searched for new materials during that time. They were out of business from April of 1865 to November of 1865. So they didn't cover the Sultana at all, you see. Richmond falls, the Civil War ends, Montgomery falls, Lincoln assassinated. Boom, 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 boom. Now you're trying to get Union soldiers back upriver. The quickest way, or back up to the north, the quickest way is by river, not by road or railroad, because they were all damaged. So steamboat certificates were relaxed. Captains were incentivized. Captains got $5 for every enlisted man, $10 for every officer. Here's the Gayoso House on Main Street. I show that because John Reed McClanahan had come back to relaunch the paper, and by the time he had come back, he was found dead somehow in an alley in June of 1865 under mysterious circumstances. And so it finally got relaunched by November, and then Benjamin Franklin Dill dies in 1866, get purchased by Galloway. There was a long-standing lawsuit about all that going on. There's Galloway who purchased the appeal. Elmwood Cemetery later on There's a Confederate soldiers' rest there and a Confederate monument. There you go, right there in the Confederate section. But McClanahan finally, when he died, there wasn't even money or any relatives around to get him a grave. He was almost buried in a pauper's grave, but a cousin came forward and buried in an unmarked grave. And on October 11th, 1998, family members came and recognized, and here's his site right here. And the Dills also got recognized as well in a ceremony at Elmwood. And there's the what it actually says on this right here. It's a little bit easier to read, but not when I'm flicking it back and forth, I'm sure. We're running out of time, so I'm going to keep on going here. Back to Sultana now. So this boat, certificated for 376, right? Okay. Certificates were relaxed, so they put more people on there than they should, and supplies. And here's a picture down to the New Orleans riverfront. The prison camps in Andersonville and Cahaba, just think of these conditions here, people having to walk from the prison camps across the Mississippi to get to Vicksburg or Natchez or whatever, to get on a boat, to be mustered out up in Ohio. You know what I mean? Just terrible conditions. Union troops mustered there for the return. You had Speed and Cass of the big names. Again, this is a topic that's a good 2 or 3 hours. Worth the whole museum, right? Great museum. Over 2,300 passengers on this boat and 100 horses and 1 stove. How would you like to have another 400 people in this room, 10 horses, and no water, no microwave, no nothing for 7 days on a boat that had faulty boilers and already been patched up? Not good, huh? The wharf at Vicksburg is very confusing. Again, Jerry Potter does a wonderful job. And I'm not going to tell you much more because I want you to go to Sultana, April 27th. But here's Camp Fisk there at Vicksburg, trying to load the troops there. Somebody took a lunch break. Somebody snuck another 8,000 on. No, snuck another 800 on during a lunch break. Reuben Hatch is the one that's Captain Speed. That's actually a street name for Speed in Vicksburg, isn't it? And Jerry Potter cannot find a picture of Reuben Hatch. Find a picture of Reuben Hatch for Jerry Potter, please.
20 years we've been looking.
20 years. Nobody can. Of course, here's a friend of Lincoln and all this other stuff. Lady Gay departed empty. You know, we had a boat 6 times its legal limit. This is the last picture in Helena. 7 miles. Finally get to Memphis on April 26th. It's got to go 7 miles upriver here in the swollen waters of the flood season. And April 27th at 2 a.m. Is this from the museum right now? Is this where I stole this from? I stole this from somewhere. And April 27th at 2 a.m. and men are sick. It's the end of the Civil War. It is cold and the river is flooded. Your country is decimated. All of a sudden there's an explosion. You're heading home. The water propels you into the water. From a POW camp, you are emaciated and tired. Can you survive hypothermia, burns, or river? This boat is overcrowded. Will you get home? Just think of all this going on with these poor folks. And it blows up. Many people are dead before they hit the water by the explosion of the boilers. Many drown, many try to hold on to trees. There's a lot of interesting stories. Here's the comparison, like Lewis said. The Titanic's 882 feet long, the Sultana 260. Overlooked why? You know, again, bodies float by Memphis for days. Over 2,300 people lost their life. Why do we know more about it? Well, the weekend of the killing of John Wilkes Booth, the weekend of the arrival of President Lincoln's funeral in Springfield after going around for like 2 weeks around the country, even to Albany, even by barge. It was the longest funeral procession in the history of our country. Only 3 weeks since the war ended, only 2 weeks since the assassination. There's a new administration in D.C. The country is trying to heal. Nobody wanted to hear about something else going wrong in the South with the Civil War. And the Sultana was the news boat. So the news sank with the news boat too. You know what I mean? A lot of factors why I don't hear much about it. Here's the Sultana Survivors Association. I understand they met up until like the 1930s. There were 3 guys left. They met in Knoxville. Only one guy could make it. He voted himself president, vice president, and secretary, and went home the next week and died. You know, so they died out. Many are from the Indiana, Ohio area. They're northern prisons, but Knoxville has a great cemetery there. The Sultana Historical Preservation Society on the Sesquicentennial Cruise from the Cobblestone Wharf in Memphis. We loaded from that Cobblestone Wharf, or did we? Maybe Bill Street Landing. We tried to, and we went upriver, and we had Mayor Fogman, who's the mayor now, Frank, had his little GPS, and we're exactly 7 miles up, straight across from there's a site from the land where it went down, and it's a soybean field now. And here we are up there, and so you can see Memphis from there. And we had the 52nd Regimental String Band playing. Oh, they put their blue uniforms on. They didn't like that too much. One guy was pouting, going, General Lee only surrendered to the Army of Northern Virginia. I said, it's over with. It's over with. Come on, we're going to play songs here. Let's be happy. Had a 4-gun salute. Of course, we were shooting over at Fraser. And be careful there. Had a great ceremony where we named every, there was 99 people on the boat, I believe it was, and we named, each one had a descendant or that was a survivor or victim, and they put a white rose in the water or a red rose. This was all filmed by the documentary, because that night we saw an early run of the documentary at the Paradiso Theater. And they would rank, regiment, and then throw the rose in the ground. Now, this is my stupidity. I was thinking, well, they're going to throw that flag. We got a cobblestone. We wrapped the flag around a cobblestone. We stole a cobblestone from Memphis. I was there, though, in 1865, and we put the flag of that time in there and sank it as well. And, man, that flag, but that cobblestone sinks like that. Don't wait to get a picture. I missed that. And then here's all of them. They're like a team picture there at Beale Street Landing. There's me. Her grandfather was on the Sultana. So he was 70 years old and he had his last baby like in 1920. Think about that. Usually you're talking about great-grandfather or great-great-grandfather. She's from Kansas. I remember them. I saw them trying to go down the slope to the pyramid the day after that too. So we lost the Sultana marker somewhere in 2013. Andrew Carroll paid for the replacement of the marker based on an adventure he took through the Gaelso Bayou with some unknown person that the mayor told him he could do it with that year. And he fell in love with me and Jerry Potter. There's Jerry Potter talking there. We unveiled the marker again. There's Andrew Carroll. He was writing a book about lost history in America. Like they cut down a tree in a redwood tree in California, and they counted it, and it was the oldest tree in California, so they lost it. Or the Sultanas lost history, or they were Googling Memphis and lost history for Tennessee, and they came up with the the Gaelso Bayou and Yellow Fever. So the Sultana Disaster Museum, this is an early rendering and some early drawings of a couple of years ago we were involved in. Just want to show that real quick. The interpretive plan, I'm sure some of this will change or be modified. But this is a Reb Hazlett drawing here from Memphis. Just some of the images we have as this continues over a long quest over here. Marion's not a real big community. It's closer to downtown Memphis than Collierville is, or Germantown. You don't realize how close it is. There's that guy. That's Thomas Edison's grandson, no doubt. So there's the Sultana story. Real quickly, right after the Civil War, we get up to Thomas Edison lived in Memphis in 1865 and 1866. He worked for the Military Telegraph Company. We had Reconstruction. We had schools for freemen all over the community. We still had about 4,000 U.S. colored troops mustered here. And then, as you well know, the Memphis Race Riot of 1866 occurred. And there's another title that's more popular now called A Massacre in Memphis. And it was a massacre for sure. All the circumstances are completely told in the current version, but that's just distortion is what we call it sometimes. But there was a bunch of troops who just got heard the week before. Their fort was being closed. They had nowhere to go. They didn't know how to be free, and there was trouble back and forth between the Irish who had come in and taken over the town when the white Confederates had left. So you really had three things going on, and a lot of animosity between all three groups. And just for no reason, well, for very little reason at all, and you really can't say reason. And for 3 days in May of 1866, white Irish police officers mainly just slaughtered a bunch of black folks and burned schools and all that. It was just a terrible, devastating thing for our city. There's a whole big study and seminar on this at the University of Memphis. Historical marker was laid. My only problem with this marker, it just kind of starts in the middle of the story, right at the first, and you use the same text on both sides when you could have used both sides with different text. That's all I want to say on that. But this all kind of led to the congressional investigations, led to the 14th and 15th Amendments. Memphis National Cemetery opened in 1867, and there's over 40,000 veterans buried in Memphis National Cemetery. It is full. Out there at where the rail yard passed Austin P. Highways, let's say. Just a couple of images there. The Peabody Hotel opened in 1869. Here's Memphis in the 1870s. And look at the population mix. Here in the 1850s, we're 28% black. With all the folks coming in during the Civil War, you increase. Then the in-migration from the Delta coming in, and the immigration from Europe, we grow. Now Memphis' population is 63% black, one of the highest in the country. Here's the Hebe fountain at Court Square. Things were good. We had 50 citizens give $1,000 each to make this fountain in 1876 for our country's centennial. Things were really good if you make a statue there for $50,000. And all their names are in the wall there, all the leading citizens. But then 2 years later, what the Civil War couldn't do to Memphis, the mosquito did. We went into bankruptcy for 14 years. Lost our charter, became a taxing district. We distributed the food, picked up the dead, and camped on the bluff. The Howard Association came to town. There was refugee camps. We were quarantined during this time. This is far worse than the Civil War, you know. I mean, we lost 3/4 of our population in 1 month due to desertion and disease. The largest natural loss of life for a national disaster in the history of our country was that summer in Memphis in 1878, larger than the Johnstown flood, Chicago fire, and San Francisco earthquake combined. A man by the name of George William came to town, thought it'd be a good idea to separate the sewage water from the drinking water. Yeah. We had a model for the sanitary sewer plan, the yellow fever epidemic. The Howard Association came up, was organized, brought a bunch of nurses and doctors in to help. 15 members grew to 32 in 1878. 19 were stricken, 10 died. So the yellow fever after the war was very devastating for our community. Over in Elmwood, there's a whole lot of commemoration over there. These nuns, 4 nuns that you hear about at St. Mary's Episcopal Church, they're buried, and the 2 priests there are buried at Elmwood. There's Martyrs Park down on the riverfront. St. Mary's Church, the nuns are actually immortalized. Constance, Ruth, Thecla, and Francis are actually immortalized in the altar here in the church, you see. And then there's Constance and Reverend Parsons, Martyrs Park. I don't know, we got to go Martyrs Park. So what brought us back was the rails and the cotton. Between 1900 and 1910, there was over 100,000 people in Memphis, but just 10% of the people are actually born in Memphis. We've become such a melting pot during that time. The Lee lines really helped. They controlled the waterways from Paducah to Greenville. And then the other big boats came. Then the railroads came in after that in the 1880s. And then we built bridges. Before you had a bridge, it took 2 days to get a train across the river, 5 cars at a time. These are the 2 big important bridges we built that connected us to the West Coast. You've seen these pictures before. I wouldn't ride on that bridge either. May 12th, 1892 was a big moment. Again, the growth by decade. You see where the yellow fever hit us, then the immigration and immigration from Europe, all the way up to Depression. 1900, the greatest day in Memphis history, passing the 100,000 mark. So today we are America's distribution center because, 150 years ago, 160 years ago, we were saved by a battle in Memphis that we didn't want to disrupt our supply chain at the time, you know, between river and rails. So now we're river, railways, roadways, runways. And I don't know why I put that picture in there. It's just there just to show how those goofy guys filmed that tiger roaring in the MGM movie from Memphis. There I am. Thank you for coming today. We'll have some question and answers now.